Peace to you, my friends. A few years ago, St. Andrew Parish was very blessed when it was assigned a transitional deacon. A transitional deacon is someone who works and lives in a parish for a few months as that young man is actually preparing for being ordained as a priest. And that transitional deacon at the time was Deacon Michael Trail, who now is Father Michael Trail. Some of you may remember him from a few years back. When I first received the news that we were going to be getting a transitional deacon, I was very much excited. I thought, that's great. It's great to have another person on board to help out with sacramental duties and helping out with the parish and so forth. And I remember our first meeting when we first sat down formally to talk about what this time was going to look like, what each of us can expect, and perhaps what are the needs that each of us have in order for this to work out well. And it didn't take long in the conversation before I began to realize, and I'm sure Father Michael Trail realized the same, that this was going to be a lot harder than we had anticipated. Because in that conversation, it became very clear to me that he and I were two very different people. Not just in personality, he's very much an extrovert, I'm very much an introvert. But even theologically, in the way that we think about things, about our faith, and the way we approach them. Our pastoral approaches, of course, were also very different. And I can get all caught up in some of those differences. But one of the more simpler ways that I can talk about that to help illustrate that has to do with the issue of clerics. Clerics is what we call the clothes that a priest wears to distinguish himself as a priest. In my generation, the priests that taught me and I grew up with were, they really tried to be one with the people and to try to remove anything that would be an obstacle for people to feel like they can approach us. And the feeling, of course, or the thinking is that sometimes the clerics could be an obstacle. People kind of are afraid of us or mystified by us or, don't know how to relate to us because we're priests and maybe don't even see the humanity that all of us as priests share in. In Father Michael Trail's generation, they've been taught a different way of looking at clerics. For them, clerics do exactly the very thing that my generation tries to avoid. For them, clerics really identifies them as priests. And more of that, they are very much countercultural to a world that is very secular. So they give witness to a different way of looking at life than the world proposes. It took me a while to understand that. But when I finally understood that, I realized the value that Father Michael Trail was trying to live out in his life. The funny thing is, after that time period had passed, and even years later, Father Michael Trail and I have become friends, and we laugh now in the ways that we've influenced each other, even something as simple as clerics. Since that experience, I find myself wearing my clerics more often now, and feeling very comfortable about that, and putting away that thought that clerics might be an obstacle. And I've also noticed Father Michael Trail as well too, wearing regular street clothes more often than perhaps he used to when he was here. I give thanks to God for that experience because it was an experience and a lesson in humility that I don't have all the answers and that someone who can be very different from me might actually have some solutions that I had never considered, or ways of looking at things differently that are of equal value to the way I look at things. I offer that illustration today, my friends, because I think it has a lot to do with the Word of God today and also for what is going on in our world. As we live in a world that is so torn apart because of the strong polemics, because of people on either side of whatever spectrum we might be talking about, each of them holding to their positions, each of them fighting really hard to make their voice heard to the point of not hearing the other voice. And we've learned that the side effect of that is that our society is not only fractured, but it's paralyzed. It's immobilized because solutions aren't found with everyone yelling at each other. The Word of God today offers us a way out of that dilemma. We can look at the first reading, the reading from the prophet Ezekiel, where he tells the people that the Lord will be sending a king. But the king that he will be sending is not the type of king that they are going to be expecting. They are expecting a king who is going to come and wage war. They're expecting a king who's going to come and fight for their side. The people of Israel was a people that was conquered and subjugated by many nations. And you can imagine the effect that that had on people. They would want someone to finally put an end to that. And that's what they were hoping for in terms of the king that the prophet Ezekiel promised them, which of course is the foreshadowing of Jesus. But the king that God has in mind is not one who comes to wage war. Rather, he is the one who comes to offer a different way, which is the way of peace. Obviously, that's a hard thing for someone to accept when you're expecting one thing and you're giving something completely different. In today's gospel, Jesus also touches on those themes. He says, I give praise to you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for although you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, you have revealed them to little ones. Now, when we hear those words, I know I'm tempted to think to myself, well, I'm one of those little ones. I'm one of the ones who's open to what Jesus has to say. I'm willing to learn from him. But if I'm honest with myself, I'm often like the wise and the learned, who has it all figured out, or thinks he has it figured out, who has all the answers, or at least approaches life as if he has all the answers. And unfortunately, in that type of environment, there is no room for growth. In that type of environment, really, God's job is really hard to help change people's hearts if someone thinks they've got it all figured out. Rather, what really he proposes, the attitude that we should be taking, really is the one of the little ones. The little ones are the disciples who really are open to what he has to offer. That we learn from him. That we are open to the way, the path that Jesus comes to offer, which is oftentimes very different from the path that the world offers. And he uses this wonderful image of a yoke. He says, come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves, for my yoke is easy and my burden light. Now, Jesus is using an agricultural image that might be a little foreign to us, but a yoke is a large piece of timber that is placed over the shoulders of two strong animals so that they can pull a cart or a plow, and usually those animals were oxen. But the thing to notice here is that you need two in order for a yoke to work. So Jesus is now telling us that you take the yoke of Jesus and that's it, and we're on our own. No, what Jesus is offering us is that we take on his yoke, that we take the other side and walk with him on life's journey. And Jesus is the one who will help us through those difficulties in life when perhaps things are beyond our understanding, or when we finally come to realize that we don't have all the answers, and that maybe we should need to listen to what he has to offer. That's what he means by my yoke is easy and my burden light. Once again, reflecting back to my experience with Father Michael Trail, after time went by, I realized the amount of energy I spent in that time holding fast to my way of looking at things and trying to make him understand. And I realize now that that's wasted energy. And how oftentimes we do that in life, that we spend all our energy making our voices heard, making our opinions known, over and above any other voices, and how tiresome that really is. And as difficult as the path is that Jesus offers us, it actually is much less burdensome than the burden that we put on ourselves of always wanting to be right and to have all the answers. My friends, in this fractured world that we live in, we need this word of God to really sink into our hearts more than ever, that we might learn to be the little ones, that we might learn humility, that we might admit to ourselves that we haven't figured it all out, and that perhaps the person on the other side might have part of the solution. And ultimately, the one who has the complete solution is Jesus himself. And that way, that solution that Jesus offers challenges us all, left and right, liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. Jesus' way is challenging to us all. If only we stop listening to political leaders, to pundits, to influencers who tell us how we should think, talk, and act, and instead listen to the one who really has the answers, the one who has all the solutions. If only we would listen and take up his yoke and find peace.